Hi everyone, and thank you for coming. First, I would like to ask you to raise your hands if you have ever heard this abbreviation CDP, which stands for Customer Data Platforms, and some of the examples are Segment, Snowplow, and RiderStack. Have any of you heard of it? Please raise your hand. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4. So 4 hands. That's not surprising for me because customer data platforms is a fairly new phenomenon, and but I think it's important for you to know about it because this is probably the future. And you as software engineers will be tasked in implementing customer data platforms at your organizations. And given that we have quite a few business owners here as well, or like somebody who also works as a software engineer and has a business on the side, this could be useful to have a bit of a context from the business side of things. I have worked extensively with one particular CDP segment, and my function involves working a lot with a variety of stakeholders across marketing, data, software engineering, and also product. So let's get started. What exactly are CDPs and what do they do? In order to explain that, I would like to compare them against data management platforms. A famous example of a data management platform is Facebook. What they do is they collect all the user data and then run relevant ads based on that. And the distinction here is that CDPs, they help you build first-party data collection, and whereas DMP, they rely on third-party. So what's the difference? First-party data is the data that you, as an organization, collect about your users. Second party is the data that comes from non-competing partners organizations. So the downside here is that you cannot rely how it was collected exactly, if it meets your standards, how compliant it is. And third party is the data that is collected from a variety of different sources. And there are a few things. We have all heard about all these recent scandals that involved Facebook on the news, and they have led these 3 different forces that are now directly affecting data management platforms in a negative way. They are consumer actions. So every time you install an ad blocker or any privacy enhancing extension, you make Mark Zuckerberg cry. Custom browser extensions and different OS settings, privacy regulations in GDPR. So you know these annoying pop-ups that it's not actually just about these pop-ups. It's a very useful piece of legislation, and it is making a change for good. And browser and OS restrictions. You may have noticed this little logo here because it's a bit of a small elephant in the room. Because Apple has implemented, and Firefox, they have implemented intelligent tracking prevention and enhanced tracking prevention a while ago already. But Chrome is yet to do that. They were initially planning to do that this year, then they moved the deadline to 23. And now, again, the latest deadline, hopefully the last, third time is the charm, is second half of 24. The reason why they keep doing that is because they themselves and the industry as a whole are not fully ready for that seismic shift from removing third-party cookies support. They try to mitigate it by by developing federated learning of cohorts or flocks, which was a way to put users together in different groups and assign different tags to their characteristics. But now they're switching to Context API, which will be more about, well, as it says on the tin, the topics API, sorry, on the topics of the website and which topics are relevant to you. They also, one of the other things that they do is whenever you click on an ad, you may have noticed already, they add a unique click ID to each time you do that. And they ask advertisers to pass on that data within the conversion payload as well. So this way they can link your activity and know who is converting and who isn't. As you can imagine, all of these driving forces are not reflecting too well on the Meta stock price. This is a very Of course, this is not the only reason why the stock isn't doing well, metaverse, but this is one of the driving forces. Unlike Google, who has 65% of their revenue coming from ads, with Meta it's 98%, so their effect is a bit more. On the flip side of these changes, we have a new market segment for CDPs, and it is growing. According to International Data Corporation, this market is valued at 2.2 billion, and in 21 it has grown by 62%. We don't have the data for 23 yet, but we have no reasons to believe that the trend will not continue unless it is affected by the current economic conditions. So let's look at the typical tracking and conversion tracking setup that we have on the website now. It can be a Google Analytics text, Metapixel. The principle will be pretty much the same. I'm using Metapixel here as an example. So the parts that matter is we're loading a JavaScript, we initialize it with our unique ID, and we send a basic page view event. Now with Metapixel, what they also do is they add a fallback of a pixel, which is how a lot of the tracking has been done historically. But what I've heard as well, some companies are relying more and more on that now because of the compliance issues. After that, all we do is we add custom code for the events that we want to track, and we pass on the properties that are relevant to that particular event. If you have used a tagging solution like Google Tag Manager or plugin or a framework, you might be seeing this code for the first time, but this is how it works under the hood. And now let's talk about the issues with the current setup. First of all, this method relies heavily on third-party cookies, and with all of that data being gone, we will need to make sure that we pass on more information to the advertising platform so that your marketing department can run effective campaigns. It affects quite heavily page speed. I've added a graph here, and let's look at the fast 3G example. Without any tags, a page that would load in 4 seconds for document complete would take 7.7 seconds if you hard code the tags, so insert them into the HTML, or 7.1 if you use in Google Tag Manager. How many of you knew that using Google Tag Manager can actually increase your page speed with all the same? Yeah, that was a surprise for me as well. So that's a very substantial difference. And on top of that, you don't have data governance. Data governance can be very important, especially in larger organizations. More on that a bit later. So how things look like when we work with a CDP. This is an example of segment implementation. This will look similar. So we're loading the JavaScript code. We initialize it with our unique ID. In that case, it's called a write key. And we send a basic analytics page event. If you will be tasked with implementing a segment or any other CDP, please make sure that you don't forget that this is there. Because one of the common mistakes that I see in implementation is adding a new page event for page views. So you have this page view event, and then on top of it you have another one that can be named something else, like specific to that product. In case if you're implementing it on a mobile device, you will need to use a slightly different called screen, which is self-explanatory. This is an Objective-C example. And on top of that, apart from page and screen calls, we have 3 more. Track is the most common one that you will use for any event that you want to track. That is a regular user interaction. But then we have group and identify. Their main purpose is about building up the audience and user data. With group, you will group your users based on similar characteristics. And with identify, you will mostly use it when user logs in, signs up, or updates their data. So this way, you can stitch your user sessions even if they were logged out initially, and also link it across devices. How does it work? This is an example of an event payload that is generated based on that call. Here we can see an anonymous ID. This is where the magic happens. A segment will automatically generate it, and then when you run an identify event, it will assign a user ID to every event that you send. This is you also get the context, and you can utilize it. Please make sure you do, because a lot of the times data consumers forget about it, and then data engineers, they also implement like different properties that already exist in the context API. So it's very powerful. Make sure you use it or lose it. And then on top of that, there is some additional metadata about the event. So how this looks like from a bird's eye view. You install the CDP code, you add some tracking code, you configure your sources, you configure your destinations, and they all flow through Segment magically. Is that it? Sounds marvelous, right? Well, no, that's not it. You shouldn't forget about data governance, because this will enable you to build trust to your data from your data consumers. You need to come up with a tracking plan for your organization, and then this will define the events that you want to track, their descriptions, so you make sure that you use the right event for the right actions. And then you should define the schema for the properties and their values. So basically the data types. What you do with that you have different options. You don't have to enforce it, so you can just make sure that you QA all of your events, but CDPs normally allow you to also enforce that schema. It can be on different levels. You can start with just enforcing event names. So if the event is not matching by the name, then it's rejected. You can also look at the properties to make sure that all of the data types are correct. And with that, you can either omit the property that violates your schema or reject that event entirely. And you can, and you can apply all of that in the harshest way. And you have also the option to forward all of the violating events to a separate data source, so that none of it ends up downstream. So there are also privacy controls. So what you have the option to define all of the pieces of personal identifiable information. You can add a classification and define which destinations, such as Google Analytics, Facebook, you want that data to end up in or not. It's quite powerful. You can basically suppress different pieces of data, but you can also do it at the user level. So if somebody sent you a do not track request, you can honor that through that functionality. So data streaming is the cool kid on the block as well. Services like Kafka and Amazon Kinesis, and some of you are already using it, which is why I thought it would be worth mentioning as well. So how can it work together with Segment, and what are the specific benefits that are applicable in this case? You can use Kafka or Amazon Kinesis as a source or a destination for your data here. But the key distinction is that Kafka is server-side, but some of your data will be client-side. So this way you can still go through Segment and all of the privacy, data quality controls, and it can end up to all of the destinations that are connected to it. Plus you benefit from having one single analytics API, so this track page and all the other calls. And the identity graph, that is the main benefit of having a CDP, and which enables your marketing teams to have audiences that they want to show their ads. So this is the list of all the websites. We've talked about these four, but the the other two, which are slightly smaller and easy to explain, is that you can easily connect a new destination if you need to. You can basically write a function and it will connect to through the API to wherever you need. So for example, at work, I recently wrote a function that sends data to Pinterest conversion API because that connection wasn't available, and that was really cool. But it's also really powerful, so please be careful with that. Because this has totally happened to a friend. Segment was down for a couple of hours because of a recursion. That's happened to a friend. And the other benefit is that there is a single source of truth. But on the flip side, it's also a single point of failure. So downsides are, it is pretty expensive if you're going with a proprietary solution such as Segment or Rudderstack. But if you're going with a open source solutions such as Snowplow, it will have a steeper learning curve because at the moment, they don't offer hosted solution. It's just, you have to host yourself. And there is a bit of vendor lock-in as well. And yeah, single point of failure, as I've mentioned. As a conclusion, it's pretty basic. CDPs are not ideal, but they are the future, and you'll probably need them at some point. And this brings to the end of my presentation. Thank you. And yeah, I will open to any questions you may have.
Okay. Okay.
Do you have some practical examples of the things CDPs empower you to do that you couldn't do with Google Analytics, for example?
Yes, so the main thing that you can do is build an audience for your organization and then relay that audience to advertising platforms such as Google Ads or Facebook, Pinterest. You can still do it now using basic Metapixel, but we're moving towards a cookieless world. So this is future-proofing your marketing stack, basically, this way. Plus, as there is an additional performance benefit that you will get from it, because you can move your tags server-side this way. And yeah, so these are the main benefits. And also the data governance. So you get better quality data in the end. Okay.
Is there any solution that doesn't have a vendor locking that I can just migrate to another solution in case you don't want to work with these guys, like besides Segment, for example?
Snowplow is an open source solution. Yeah, so it does exist. It works very well. They don't have a large market share based on the data that I have seen, but yeah, it's a valid solution as well.
I have one. You say that you can enforce your tracking plan at even name level and so on. And one of the problems that I had is to make the developers know that they missed an event. So do you know if there is this loop back field?
Yeah. So what you can do is set up notifications by email. You can also set up a separate destination for all of your events that are violating the schema.
Okay.
One of the things that I forgot to mention is another use case that's very useful in data governance, is that when you have some software engineers running in the wild and implementing a lot of different tracking codes, sometimes errors occur, and you can potentially, that can eventually protect your analytics billing. Specific example, iOS team wrote some code which generated millions of events. And in Google Analytics, where all of these events were coming in, that's how you're built based on the event volume. So that was a lot of fun. So that's another specific example how it can benefit your organization. Okay.
So I think at the beginning you said something like, because it's harder to get cookies these days, marketing teams are forced to send more information to advertisers to counteract that. How does that work? And what kind of information do you send?
So this is how it works. You add these data to the payload, and you can send a client side to server side, and this is the data that is generated by your users. Naturally, that needs to be within the framing of your privacy policy. Goes without saying, but this is how you send all that additional data.
So that goes to the CDP, or
it goes to segment, and then segment what they do. There was a graph here as well. So it goes first from your sources to segment, and then it goes to your destination. So, for example, advertising is here.
Right, and you send some sort of key that allows Facebook to identify your customer.
You do that during the setup stage when you're setting up your destinations. And so you just add the API key. Also, they normally require you to hash that data, of course. And then it's just an API call to Facebook Conversion API or Pinterest Conversion API, you name it. There are more than 300 destinations available. And as I said, you can write your own if you ever need to. Okay. Any questions? I guess no.
Okay, thank you very much.